"Darling, your mom changed the password. I can't use her card anymore." My daughter-in-law's words cut through the air like sharp blades. I was sitting at the head of the table in my own house, yet I felt like an intruder, as if I had invaded a space where I was no longer welcome. She pronounced each syllable with a mocking tone, looking at me sideways, as if savoring the taste of the provocation. The smile that formed on her lips was small, but it carried more venom than a scream. My son, sitting next to her, laughed softly. It wasn't a hearty laugh, not even a real laugh. It was a muffled, almost embarrassed sound, revealing the cowardice of someone who prefers to hide behind complicity rather than defend his own mother. He lowered his eyes to his plate, pretending to carefully cut his meat, as if that meticulous movement could hide him from the tension that filled the room. No one said anything. The other family members present preferred to busy themselves with their cutlery. Some looked at their glasses, others at the floor. The silence, which should have been just the absence of sound, became an accomplice. A silence that said, "She shouldn't respond, she shouldn't get up, she should just swallow it." But I didn't swallow. My heart did pound hard in my chest, as if each beat was an attempt to break the mask I had always used to survive. I stayed quiet, but my silence wasn't submission. It was the containment of an ancient fury, trained by a lifetime not to explode. How many times had I heard subtle insinuations about my skin color, my ways, my age, without anyone having the courage to say it openly? How many times was I put on the sidelines, offered the chair in the corner of the room, treated as if I were a decoration too old to be in the center? In that moment, however, I realized there were no more disguises. It wasn't just about the card, about a changed password. It wasn't about the plastic in the wallet, but about the symbol. The old black woman could no longer be useful. She could no longer be the extended arm that discreetly helped out when money was short. She could no longer be the silent bridge that sustained what they pretended was independence. For my daughter-in-law, I had just been reduced to what she had always wanted me to be: an inconvenience. I observed every detail, as if filming a movie inside my own head. The way she arched her eyebrows, defiant, as if she had won a secret battle. The way her body leaned slightly forward, seeking complicity in the eyes of others, as if to say, "See, I finally put this woman in her place." And I also saw the discomfort on some faces around the table, not because they cared about me, but because they knew that provocation could ruin the mood of the lunch. My breathing grew heavy, but I didn't let it show. I learned early on that exposing fragility to someone who wants to crush you is giving them ammunition. So I smiled. A small, almost imperceptible smile, but enough to confuse her. She expected an attack, a tear, maybe a scene. But she didn't expect calm. She didn't expect the strategic silence of someone who watches the prey giving themselves away with every gesture. As I chewed slowly, I felt the memory of so many other humiliations slide down my throat like sharp stones. I remembered when I was called Cleaning Lady Maria at a family party of my son's friend, just because my simple dress didn't match the sophisticated environment. I remembered the times she herself, my daughter-in-law, praised other mothers-in-law for their elegant demeanor, and finished with a crooked smile when she looked at me. But everyone gets the mother-in-law they deserve, right? Everything was always said in a playful tone, but they were jokes that never made me laugh. In that instant, however, it wasn't just another microaggression. It was a message. She wanted to get me out of there, wanted to see me small, wanted to show me that there was no more room for me at the center of that table, in that family, maybe not even in that house. My heart hurt, yes. But the pain was accompanied by a new, almost cutting lucidity. I knew at that very moment that this would not be just another bitter memory to keep deep in my chest. This would be the spark, the beginning of something bigger. And as she settled back into her chair, satisfied, believing she had won, I could only think of one thing. One day, and it wouldn't be long, she would taste her own venom in front of everyone who was now pretending not to hear. But silence is a weapon, and I already knew I would have my moment. I am 62 years old, and each of those decades is etched on my skin, not as wrinkles, but as scars of resistance. I am the daughter of a cleaning lady and a driver, simple people who dreamed of seeing me graduate. I was a nurse for more than 30 years, working in hospitals that didn't hide their discomfort at having a black woman in positions many thought didn't belong to me. I was the only one to receive sideways glances when I arrived for the night shift, as if my presence needed to be explained. Sometimes I heard, "You're lucky to be here," as if it weren't years of study, sleepless nights, and the courage to face double shifts that sustained me. I raised my son alone. His father left me when he was still crawling, saying he wasn't born for the prison of a family. He never came back. I moved on, firm even when it seemed impossible. I remember the nights when there was no milk and I preferred not to eat to ensure he had something on his plate. I believed that every sacrifice would be rewarded in the future, that the boy would grow up, understand, and be proud of the mother who supported him alone against the world. And for a long time I believed that was the case. He seemed grateful, he hugged me, he called me a warrior. But it only took the presence of a new woman in his life for me to start noticing small cracks in that image. The daughter-in-law arrived with expensive perfume, designer clothes, and a gaze that passed through me as if I were invisible. It wasn't just indifference. It was a constant evaluation, like someone measuring the value of an object before deciding whether it's worth keeping or discarding. At family gatherings, she disguised her contempt with comments dressed as kindness. "You must have had a simple life, haven't you? You must not be used to international trips, fancy restaurants." I would smile, even though I knew it wasn't curiosity, but a reminder. In her view, I was nothing more than a limited woman. She always offered me the chair in the corner of the table, far from the main conversations, as if my presence were too much noise in the center. And when I spoke, I noticed the way she discreetly looked at others, as if asking for patience for having to listen to me. Every gesture of hers was calculated, every silence a way to exclude me. I pretended not to notice, but every detail was accumulating inside me like heavy stones. It wasn't just prejudice from a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. It was the reproduction of something deeper, the discomfort of seeing me as someone who resisted, who still maintained autonomy, who didn't depend on them to survive. For her, I was a shadow she couldn't erase. When that phrase about the card echoed in the room, I understood that it wasn't the beginning of hostility, but the climax of a process that had been patiently built. She wanted to see me diminished. She wanted everyone to witness my silent fall. But she didn't know the woman who was standing before her. Because I am not just a mother-in-law, an elderly woman, an inconvenient old lady. I am the daughter of a history of survival. I am the result of generations who could never have dreamed of half of what I have achieved. I am the woman who faced crowded hospitals and veiled prejudice, who buried co-workers in the pandemic and returned the next day to save lives, because I had no choice. I am the one who was never invited to the center of the party, but who supported the table so that the party could exist. And if she believed that a poisonous comment would be enough to destroy me, she was mistaken. I had already resisted things much bigger than the venom of a sharp tongue. That day, I realized that something inside me had awakened. I would no longer be just the mother who swallows insults to protect peace. I would no longer be the woman who accepts silence as the only way out. If she had underestimated me, now she would have to bear the weight of that mistake. I looked at her and smiled. I felt that this gesture confused her, as if she were silently asking, "Why isn't she reacting?" Little did she know that that smile was just the beginning of my counterattack. Because when a woman like me decides to stand up, there is no contempt that can bring her down. And it was at that instant that I decided, I would not just be a spectator of my own humiliation. Many people think silence is weakness, but sometimes it's just the breath before the fight. If you also believe this, subscribe now to follow this story to the end. Every detail matters. After that lunch, nothing was ever the same. The phrase about the card seemed to echo in every corner of the house, impregnated in the walls like the smell of burning. I heard it again every time she entered through the door with her heels marking the hardwood floor, every time she laughed loudly to show confidence, every time she looked at me as one looks at something outdated. I started to notice details that had previously escaped me. The way she talked to my son in front of everyone. "You need to think about the future, you can't always support others." The word others was always loaded with venom directed at me, as if I were a burden, a stone tied to the neck of their happiness. He, a coward, pretended not to notice. He would agree with a brief nod, look away, but I could see that he was letting himself be molded by her words. Even my grandchildren, still young, started to repeat things that clearly didn't come from them. One day, the girl asked me why I didn't have a house that was pretty like Mom's. I smiled, but inside I bled. Another day, the boy said he preferred to eat in his room because Grandma talks too slowly and gets in the way of the conversation. I didn't blame the children, but I felt the origin of those phrases in the sharp tone of someone who wanted to reduce me to dust. The humiliations were becoming part of the routine, disguised as small jokes, calculated gestures. When I brought a simple cake for coffee, she would say loudly, "Oh, how nostalgic. It looks like something from an old bakery, doesn't it, everyone?" The laughter that followed wasn't innocent. I saw in her eyes the satisfaction of putting me in the position of being backward, old-fashioned, and outdated. When she talked about trips I had never taken, she would cast glances at me as if she wanted everyone to compare my life with hers. More and more I felt surrounded, as if I were an object in the process of being replaced. The old mother-in-law who had already fulfilled her purpose, who should be discreetly moved aside to make way for a new order. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't willing to accept that role. My silence, which she interpreted as weakness, was in fact a containment. I was observing. I was absorbing. Every word of hers became a sharp memory. Every gesture, a piece of a puzzle whose ending I didn't yet know, but which was already starting to take shape inside me. Then something curious happened. One afternoon, I realized she seemed uncomfortable with my gaze. She didn't say anything, but I noticed how her voice wavered, how she nervously ran her hand through her hair. She was used to seeing me hurt, not attentive. And my silence was now different. It wasn't passivity, it was vigilance. In that instant I felt there was more to it. Something behind her contempt, something that had not yet been revealed. Her anger didn't just come from the card or the autonomy I still maintained. Came from something bigger, from something I would still discover. I knew, from life experience, that when someone needs so much to belittle another person, it's because they are hiding their own fragility. And I was willing to find out what hers was. Little did she know that, by trying to humiliate me, she was giving me the key to my counterattack. It was on a seemingly ordinary morning that the veil began to tear. I was picking up clothes in the hallway when I heard my son's muffled voice coming from the bedroom. The door was ajar, and curiosity made me stop. I don't eavesdrop, but the tone of his voice froze me. "She's already noticed. Be careful what you say around her." My heart pounded hard, as if trying to escape from my chest. He was on the phone, and the pause right after revealed he was talking to someone who wasn't from work. My legs felt heavy. Who was he referring to as she? Me. What kind of secret was being protected from me? The feeling was like falling into a deep, dark well, but at the same time, it lit a flame of alertness in me. I didn't go in, didn't confront him, didn't make a scene. I started walking again as if nothing had happened, but inside me something had changed. It wasn't just my daughter-in-law's contempt. There was a hidden plot, and now I needed to uncover it. I began to watch more attentively. Details that were once small became glaring signs. Nervous laughs between them when I arrived unexpectedly. Messages deleted in a hurry when I entered the living room. A document folder on the table that was immediately closed when they noticed my gaze. One afternoon, I found her phone forgotten on the sofa. The screen was flashing with a notification. Purchase confirmation approved. My name was linked to the account. My whole body turned cold. She was using my information. But before I could pick up the device, she appeared in a hurry, with a forced smile, saying she had forgotten something in the car. She grabbed the phone too quickly and left almost running. I then decided to observe in silence. I checked my bank statements. Small but constant amounts were leaving at times when I was at the hospital. Purchases of clothes, reservations at expensive restaurants, subscriptions to apps I would never have made. The The trail was discreet, but undeniable. Each discovery was like a new stab, but also a step on the ladder I was beginning to climb. My daughter-in-law wasn't just trying to humiliate me. She was using my identity, my name, to benefit herself. And my son, whether he was aware of it or not, was part of it. The cruelest part was realizing how, in the following gatherings, she reinforced even more the narrative that I was outdated, incapable of dealing with modern matters. One day, she commented in front of everyone, "These things with passwords and online accounts are too complicated for some people, aren't they? It's a good thing I help." The room laughed, and I felt the venom pierce my chest. It was public humiliation disguised as a joke, when in reality she was laughing at her own audacity to be robbing me right under my nose. Kept a firm expression. Inside me, the anger mixed with an absolute clarity. I would not react with words. I would react with evidence. It wasn't enough to just confront them. It wasn't enough to throw accusations in the air. If I wanted to turn the game around, I had to be strategic. I started to write down every transaction, every oddity, every glance. I put together a hidden notebook where I recorded dates, amounts, and even the clothes she was wearing on the days the purchases appeared. I began to put the pieces together like someone building an invisible puzzle. And with each note I felt my strength grow. It wouldn't be easy. I knew I was facing someone who wasn't afraid to manipulate, who knew how to smile at the neighbors while poisoning me inside the house. But I had something she would never have: patience. And the patience of a woman like me is sharper than any blade. The web of lies was unraveling, and I was about to pull the main thread. It was a rainy afternoon. One of those afternoons where the wind hits the windows and the sound of falling water seems to want to wash your soul. I was alone in the living room, folding clothes, when I heard the sound of my son's computer being turned on. He had forgotten to log out before rushing to work. A strange light attracted me. Something inside me told me to look, as if it were a silent call. I sat in the chair slowly, almost afraid of being caught, although there was no one there. The screen was still open. And what I found chilled me completely. Messages. Conversations exchanged between my daughter-in-law and a friend. At first they were just trivialities. Clothes, dinners, parties. But it only took a few minutes of reading for the mask to be torn off completely. There was my name, written with letters full of contempt. "The old lady thinks she owns something, but I'll deal with it soon. She must think she's important, poor thing. Her son hasn't realized he's carrying dead weight." With each phrase, I felt as if a dagger was being driven into my skin. It wasn't just rejection. It was conscious cruelty. She mocked my age, my skin color, my way of speaking. She used words that I won't repeat here, but which reduced my existence to something less than, as if I were a nuisance in their lives. For an instant my hands trembled. I thought about closing the screen, pretending nothing had happened. But something inside me wouldn't let me. I took a deep breath and clicked print. The printer spat out sheet after sheet with those poisonous phrases. Each piece of paper was like a brick in the wall I was beginning to build between us. I continued searching and found more. Statements of purchases made in my name, hotel reservations, all linked to my social security number. She was using not only my card but my identity. And she did it laughing, mocking, believing she would never be discovered. At that moment I didn't cry. I didn't despair. Something much deeper was born in me. A cutting calm, like that of someone who discovers the entire game before the opponent. I put the sheets in a brown folder. Hid it at the bottom of the closet, along with my winter clothes. No one would mess with it there. Every day I would go back and add new evidence. Screenshots, receipts, even small audios recorded when she let slip malicious comments. I realized the game had changed. Until then, I was just the victim of her jokes, her microaggressions, her veiled cruelty. But now, I held in my hands the power she would never have imagined. I had her venom bottled, ready to be returned in the same measure. And in that silence, with the sound of the rain in the background, a certainty came over me. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to expose them. I was going to show everyone the true face of the woman who was so proud of humiliating me. I wouldn't just be a victim. I would be the judge. And you? How many times have you swallowed harsh words just to avoid a fight? Have you ever been called a burden within your own family? If you've been through something like this, like and share your experience in the comments. Together, our voices become stronger. After I gathered that evidence, a new kind of silence was born inside me. It was no longer the wounded silence of someone who swallows humiliation, but the calculated silence of someone who knows that victory lies in preparing every move without rushing. I started living as if I were in front of a mirror, showing a docile version of myself so she would believe she was in control, while behind the scenes I was building a completely different reality. She mocked me, smiled. She complained about the card. I said, "Honey, I'll take care of that soon." And I saw in her eyes her confidence growing. Every time she belittled me and I pretended to accept it, she believed more in her own superiority. It was like letting out a rope for someone who thinks they are free, but who, in reality, is just getting more tangled up. My son, oblivious, seemed more and more molded by her influence. I noticed how he repeated her phrases, how he justified attitudes he would have condemned before. "Mom, we need to understand that the world has changed. You can't hold on to the past." These words, said in a rehearsed tone, pierced me as if she herself were speaking through his mouth. Meanwhile, I dedicated myself to organizing everything calmly. The brown folder hidden in the closet was getting thicker. Printouts of conversations, bank statements, screenshots of reservations made in my name. Even the small audios I recorded at opportune moments, when she let slip insults disguised as jokes, were in there. It was like setting up a play where I would be the invisible director, and she, without knowing it, the main actress. I started to observe her movements as one would study an enemy on a battlefield. I noticed the hours she spent on her phone, the excuses she invented, the small inconsistencies in her speech. Every detail was a clue. And I, with the patience of someone who had already weathered much bigger storms, knew there was no need to rush anything. The most curious thing was to realize how she, trusting in my apparent conformity, was becoming more and more audacious. One day, in front of everyone, she said, "It's a good thing I help your mom with these modern things, otherwise she would be lost." The room laughed, and I laughed with them. But inside, I savored the irony. She had no idea that I already held in my hands everything I needed to bring her down. My silence, to her, was weakness. For me, it was strategy. Because there is immense power in not reacting when everyone expects you to explode. The enemy relaxes, lets their guard down, and gives themselves away completely. And that's exactly what happened. I started to imagine what the moment of exposure would be like. I didn't want anything small. I didn't want an isolated confrontation. I wanted an audience, witnesses, glances that couldn't be averted. I wanted every word she said against me to echo in front of those who had always pretended not to hear. And so, I was silently nurturing the revenge she herself had sown. Every day of waiting was a day when my patience sharpened the invisible blade I would bring to light at the right moment. I was preparing the stage for the play where she would be the main actress. And the audience would witness everything. The house I live in smells like coffee brewed at 5 in the morning, and a boy's laughter running down the hallway in slippery socks. Every wall holds marks from school project tape. Every tile in the kitchen knows my tired steps back from the hospital, and the porch has seen enough sunrises to remind me that I survived days that seemed endless. There, I planted a yellow trumpet tree that blooms yellow at the end of winter. My little annual miracle. It's not just a house. It's my testimony. It's my name standing tall. That's why, when my daughter-in-law started to insist that the house was too big for me, I felt as if a cold hand was squeezing my throat. She didn't say sell. She said practicality. She said safety. She said modernity. Polished words pushed like gifts, but they hid a single message. Erase yourself. Mother-in-law, we're worried. This house is old, maintenance is expensive, isn't it? A smaller apartment in a gated community with a doorman. It would be so much more comfortable for you. The "for you" came wrapped in the tone of a luxury commercial, the kind that shows smooth-as-glass women gliding through life without stumbling. She would look at my son after each phrase, seeking confirmation, and he would nod. Not out of conviction but out of fatigue. Someone who is tired of arguing learns to give in as if brushing their teeth. An automatic gesture. Mom, think about it carefully. We can help you with everything. Just sign. The word landed on the table like a black insect. Small, insistent, disgusting. I saw it move. I heard it buzz. At first, I tried to respond with the sweetness I had left. I talked about the yellow trumpet tree, the porch in the morning, the smell of coffee. I talked about the hallway where my son ran in his socks, the room where I soothed him during fevers, the door where I waited for hours for him to get home late when he was a teenager. I talked about my name written on the papers, the mortgage I paid off alone while swallowing double shifts and crooked glances. But what I said hit the glass wall she used to separate the things that mattered from the people who were a nuisance. Nostalgia is beautiful, mother-in-law. But life requires practicality. Her eyes said something else. What belongs to me by right of image needs to fit without you. The conversations became small fences placed around me. On alternate days, she would arrive with information from realtors. On others, she would show videos of bright apartments with beds that seemed to have never been used. Sometimes, she would purposefully leave a flyer on the table with the word "launch" in bold letters, as if offering an invitation to a party where I wasn't wanted. My son would shrink into the armchair like a man who had lost his own voice inside his own home. Slowly, he began to repeat her arguments with the right cadence, as if he had memorized them. Mom, you deserve comfort. You've done so much. Now let us take care of you. Take care. The promise hit my skin like cold water. I knew that beneath that veneer, there was a plan to move me to a corner, as they do when they rearrange furniture to fit something new. There was one night when everything almost fell apart. The three of us were in the living room. She opened a laptop and elegantly slid a preliminary contract over to me. I read my full name in a sober font, next to a value that was less than what the house was worth. She called it an opportunity. The friend realtor swore it was the best time. And, as if offering water to a thirsty person, she pushed a pen in my direction. We'll take care of the rest. My hand rested on the table near the pen, and the watch on my wrist marked a second as long as an eternity. I saw in a flash the entire movie of what would come next. Me, crammed into an apartment bedroom with a window that didn't get sun, my trumpet tree plant withering in a pot, my boxes scattered without a place, my name shrunk in a settled contract. Smiled. The same small smile of someone holding back an ocean with their lips. I pushed the pen back without a sound. Not yet. She pursed her lips for a second, almost imperceptibly, like a flaw in the expensive porcelain she collects to show on the internet. She reposed. She went back to the script. That's okay, mother-in-law. We understand that changes are difficult. From that night on, the microaggressions gained lace gloves. The coffee I made started to be too strong. The living room rug, too heavy. The stairs, too dangerous. I was too much to fit into the drawing she was sketching with a golden marker. When visitors came, she made a point of guiding them through the house as if it were already hers, pointing out supposed flaws with the complicity of someone preparing a renovation that didn't include me. I observed her. And I observed my son. He, increasingly small inside his own body, would let slip phrases that hurt worse than a scream. Mom, don't make it difficult. When he said that, I felt the phrase cross the hallway and, with a puff of air, erase all the nights I waited at the window for the sound of the gate. But it was also at this point that something became crystal clear. Her villainy was obvious, but his cowardice was the mortar that held the plan together. Without his omission, nothing would stand. Recognizing this hurt like pulling out a thorn that had been lodged for years, but it gave me clarity. I wouldn't just tear down her castle. I would make the foundations tremble where he decided to hide. I returned to my room and got the brown folder. The sheets stored there had the weight of smooth stones collected from a riverbank, certificates of existence, bodies of evidence of my patience. I ran my fingers over each piece of evidence like someone sharpening a blade, remembering every word I had swallowed in silence so that, at the right moment, the sound would explode. Then I closed the folder and sat on the edge of the bed. I heard, in the distance, the city breathing. I felt, very close, the house responding to my touch. Old wood, a floor that knows my steps, walls that hold my name. I wouldn't give that up in a cheap contract. If they were in a hurry, I had time. If they had a stage, I would have an audience. The next morning, I woke up with a certainty as clear as the sky after a storm. It was time to turn my pain into a spectacle. And if it was going to be a spectacle, it would have lights, guests, and testaments. Their world likes an audience. I would make sure to provide one. It was time to turn my pain into a spectacle. It was on a calm morning, with the sun streaming through the kitchen curtains, that I decided on the next step. I already had the evidence, the clarity, and the patience transformed into a blade. All that was missing was the stage. And I knew I didn't want anything small, nothing hidden within four walls. The humiliation I had lived through was always public, even if it was disguised in giggles and sideways glances. It was only fair that the revelation should be too. I picked up the phone and started calling. One by one, familiar voices answered. I invited relatives, neighbors, even old colleagues from the hospital. I used my usual sweet tone, without giving any hints. I want to get the family together. We need to talk in peace. It's been a while since we've all gathered like this. On the other end, I sensed their curiosity growing. It was rare for me to call for something like this. My silence had always been interpreted as conformity, and now this gesture sounded unexpected. As I confirmed their attendance, I imagined the scene. The chairs all occupied, the plates set, the initial conversation floating lightly before the sharp fall. It wouldn't just be a dinner. It would be the final act. On the appointed day, I prepared the house as if arranging an altar. I cleaned every corner, placed flowers on the table, and let the aroma of my orange cake fill the air. I wanted everyone to feel comfortable, safe, without suspicion. I wanted the entry to be sweet so that the contrast of the bitter would be even stronger. She arrived elegantly as always. A tight-fitting dress, shining heels, impeccable makeup. She held my son's arm as if he were a gleaming trophy and smiled at everyone with that rehearsed friendliness that only fools those who don't know the taste of venom. She greeted neighbors, complimented children, and made a point of being seen as the hostess, even though she was a guest. I watched in silence, every gesture noted in my memory as the final rehearsal before the fall. During the meal, she maintained her usual role. Polished comments that hid barbs. Mother-in-law, the food is wonderful. It's like something from the old days. People don't make it like this anymore, do they? Giggles followed, and I smiled with them. Not out of submission, but because each laugh was fuel for what was to come. My son, always silent, seemed oblivious, but I noticed the sweat on his forehead when the conversation turned to money or property. He knew something was about to happen, even if he couldn't name it. The guests settled into the living room after dessert. Children were playing on the floor, adults were talking in low voices, and some were taking photos. The atmosphere was ready. The stage was set. I walked to the living room television, where I had discreetly connected a flash drive. I touched one of the neighbor's shoulders and asked, "Could you turn up the volume a bit, please?" He looked at me with curiosity but obeyed. The screen lit up with a blue light, and I took a deep breath. This would be the instant the mask would fall. Every piece of evidence I had saved, every sheet from the brown folder, every whispered audio would turn into a loud voice in front of everyone. She, sitting next to my son, was adjusting her bracelet, still smiling, believing she dominated the room. Little did she know that every laugh would be swallowed in seconds. What she didn't know was that every word of hers would be projected in front of everyone. If you know someone who has been silenced, humiliated, or belittled within their own family, share this story with them. Sometimes, it's in the unity of our voices that we find the strength to turn the game around. The sound of the television filling the room, which had been a low murmur, made everyone turn. For a moment, I thought someone would laugh, asking if I was going to show old family photos, as I had so many times at past gatherings. But no. There were no smiling photos that night. There were sharp truths. The first image projected was a simple screenshot of a conversation. I had chosen to start lightly so that the fall would be gradual. The screen showed my daughter-in-law writing to her friend. "The old lady thinks she's in charge of something, but I'll deal with it soon." Silence fell like a stone. One of the neighbors' eyes widened. My son, confused, looked quickly at her, seeking some explanation. My daughter-in-law, however, kept her smile tense but still on her face. "It must be a fake. You know how it is with the internet. Anyone can make these things," she said with a short laugh that sounded like scraping metal. But I didn't respond. The flash drive was programmed to play in sequence. Soon came another screenshot. Then another. And another. Each one clearer, each one crueler. The words she typed in secret now echoed in front of everyone. Black letters on a white background like dry punches. "She doesn't understand anything about money, so it's easy to control. Let's see how long she'll keep this old house. I'll convince her son to sell it soon. I plan to use her information a little longer, as long as she doesn't get suspicious." The conversations moved forward like a current, and I saw discomfort settling in the room. Some relatives looked away, others shook their heads. The neighbors whispered in low voices, and even the children stopped playing, drawn by the tension filling the air. My daughter-in-law tried to stand up, but my son held her arm, not out of loyalty to me, but because he also wanted to understand. He stammered, "Honey, what is this?" She laughed, forcing lightness. "Darling, can't you see? She's making things up. This woman is. She's getting old." It was at that moment that I raised my hand. My voice came out calm but firm. "Old, yes, but not blind. Or stupid." Everyone fell silent. My phrase reverberated like contained thunder. I felt the weight of their gazes landing on me, not with pity, but with unexpected respect. The sequence on the screen continued. Bank statements, purchases in my name, restaurant reservations, values small enough to seem like details, but large enough not to go unnoticed. And there it was, in clear letters, my social security number linked to each transaction. My daughter-in-law turned pale. The red lipstick, once shining, now seemed like a misplaced stain. Her hands were squeezing the arm of the chair, but her frozen smile insisted on staying, as if her makeup were also armor. The room didn't even blink. I could hear the sound of each person's heavy breathing. One of the neighbors murmured, "My God." My niece covered her mouth with her hand. My own granddaughter, innocent, asked softly, "Mommy, why is Grandma on TV?" It was the first crack. The veneer was starting to break. And I knew, the more the light advanced, the less shadow there would be for her to hide in. The truth was starting to echo louder than any lie. The room was plunged into a silence so dense that even the ticking of the clock seemed deafening. On the screen, the screenshots had stopped for a moment, and the frozen image hung over everyone like a silent accusation. My daughter-in-law took a deep breath, trying to recompose her smile. Her red lipstick no longer conveyed confidence but resembled blood running from an invisible wound. "This is ridiculous. She's manipulating everything. You know about these fakes, right? Jealous people will do anything to get attention," she said, her voice slightly trembling. She tried to laugh, but the sound died before it came out completely. The laugh broke in half like cracking glass. I calm remained standing. I walked to the shelf, where I had discreetly left a small speaker connected to the same flash drive. Pressed the button. A dry click announced the next part. And then her voice echoed through the room. "That old black woman thinks she's in charge of something. She's just a nuisance." A collective shiver ran through the room. Some choked on their own breath. One of the neighbors, who always applauded my daughter-in-law for her elegance, widened her eyes and dropped her glass, spilling wine on the carpet. My son put his hand to his mouth, as if he could stop the phrase from continuing. But the recording didn't stop. Her son is so weak he doesn't even notice. We'll take her house soon, then I want to see where she'll live. Maybe a small room without a porch. It's what she deserves. The silence that followed was even heavier than the words. My daughter-in-law stood up abruptly, almost knocking over her chair. This is a lie. This is an invasion of privacy. Are you going to believe her? She screamed, trying to grab onto anything. But her own voice, repeated in a metallic echo, exposed every syllable. There was no way to deny it. There was no makeup, smile, or high heel that could erase that. The gazes around her changed. Those who had previously looked away, for fear of getting involved, now stared at her with disapproval. My niece, who had so often laughed at the subtle jokes against me, lowered her head, ashamed, as if she finally understood the weight of complicity. The neighbor who lived praising the exemplary family now whispered to his wife, "To think we defended that woman." My son, pale, ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of desperation that reminded me of the 10-year-old boy who cried because he had lost his soccer ball. But now he wasn't a child anymore. He was a grown man. And his cowardice was exposed in front of everyone. "Mum, I didn't know." He tried to justify, but his voice died, suffocated by the weight of his own omission. My daughter-in-law, trembling, still tried to approach the TV. "Turn it off. Now." But I, serene, stopped her with an open palm. My voice came out firm and cutting. "You wanted a stage so much. Here it is." The next audio played on its own. And as if on cue, the final words fell like a blade. "She's worthless. The day I get rid of her will be my victory." I didn't need to say anything else. Her face fell in front of everyone. The veneer of elegance, nobility, and good wife shattered into shards that clinked in the invisible air of the room. The woman who had always smiled with superiority was now trembling like a child caught in a mistake. The audience was formed. And the play continued its course. The stage was on fire, and she could no longer hide. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to be offensive or retaliate with the same weapons she used against me. Her own words, projected in letters and repeated in audio, did the work of stripping her image in front of everyone by themselves. It was as if, all of a sudden, every person present saw what I had been carrying for years. The silence stretched on, but it was no longer complicit. It was heavy, accusatory, full of judgment. The kind of silence that makes people lower their eyes not out of their own shame, but out of shame for others. My daughter-in-law remained standing, breathing fast, her chest rising and falling as if she had run a marathon. The impeccable makeup no longer hid the small cracks of sweat sliding down her forehead. She tried to maintain her posture, but her body betrayed her. Her hands trembled, and her eyes desperately sought someone to defend her. But no one stood up. One of the neighbors, who had so often praised her elegance and compared her to magazine ladies, now murmured to her husband, "To think I believed her." My niece, who had laughed at some of the subtle jokes against me, looked away, ashamed, as if she finally understood the weight of complicity. Even my grandchildren, innocent, were confused. The girl looked at her mother and asked, "Mommy, why did you say that about Grandma?" The silence that followed was more painful for her than any word. My son, sitting down, put his hands to his head. He was pale, as if all his blood had drained onto the floor. His eyes couldn't fix on me or her. He was looking at nothing, like someone who realizes the price of cowardice too late. And I saw, in that instant, that the weight that would fall on him wasn't just his wife's betrayal, but his own omission. My daughter-in-law tried one last card. "You don't understand. She's manipulating all of this. She's a bitter, jealous woman who can't accept that her son has moved on." But her voice no longer had any strength. It was just noise amidst the weight of the truth that everyone had heard with their own ears. The recordings couldn't be erased. The screenshots were in the hands of some guests who, incredulous, had taken photos with their phones. The truth was now collective. I felt a strange calm. It wasn't arrogant triumph. It wasn't a victory scream. It was the serenity of someone who carries a burden for years and finally, sets it down on the floor in front of witnesses. My entire body relaxed as if, for the first time in a long time, I could take a deep breath without fear of choking on someone else's contempt. My daughter-in-law, disoriented, stumbled in her heels, knocking over a glass as she passed. The shards scattered on the floor as a symbol of the very image she had cultivated, beautiful on the outside, but too fragile to resist the truth. My son followed her, but before he crossed the door he stopped. He turned to me. And in that look there was everything: shame, regret, guilt. He didn't say anything. And for the first time I realized that his silence was not just cowardice. It was also a late recognition of how much he had failed me. I didn't need to follow them. I didn't need to scream. I just stayed there, surrounded by gazes that were now different. Some were teary. Others were sympathetic. Even those who had once seen me as the simple woman who doesn't understand travel now approached me with timid gestures of respect. Justice, I realized, wasn't just in the evidence I had shown. It was in the look of every person who had previously looked away and was now staring. It was in the weight of the collective disapproval, in the silent judgment that no judge can decree, but which leaves a deeper mark than any sentence. I knew that night would mark everyone forever. When the door slammed behind them, the sound spread an end through the house, like when the rain finally ceases and you hear the roof breathing. I stood, not in a hurry to pick up glasses or turn off the television. The room still carried the echo of words that cannot be unsaid. Some guests slowly approached me, touched my shoulder, and said softly that they were sorry. I just nodded. It wasn't pity I wanted. It was respect. And that night finally I had it back. I picked up the flash drive like someone putting away a relic. The brown folder returned to my hands, and with it, the certainty that what saves us is not a scream, it's evidence. I grew up hearing that women like me need to speak softly so as not to seem angry. I learned late that silence can be a battlefield, and that patience, when sharpened, cuts without drawing blood. I turned off the TV, left only the yellow light of the lamp on, and sat on the edge of the sofa. The flowers on the table were still fresh. The orange cake, whole, seemed like an altar for an interrupted celebration. I smiled to myself with the corner of my mouth as I realized that, deep down, nothing had been interrupted. It had just been put back in its rightful place. It wasn't me who was out of place in that house. It was the lie. The next day, I woke up with the sun hitting the trumpet tree in the front yard. My phone vibrated early. Apology messages, solidarity, from neighbors who swore they hadn't noticed. I didn't respond to everyone. If I had to respond to everything they ignored when I was the only one bleeding, I would waste my time again. I chose to respond to life, and it was asking for new steps from me. I went to the bank. I blocked cards, changed passwords, and reviewed every account. I spoke with the manager with the calmness of someone who had spent decades managing pains greater than interest rates. I left there feeling lighter, without a new plastic card in my purse, but with my dignity refolded in my chest. At the notary's office, I filed what was necessary. At the lawyer's office, I delivered copies of the brown folder, not for revenge but for justice. Anyone who turns my identity into a toy needs to learn that names have owners. And my owner is me. In the afternoon, my son appeared at the gate. He didn't ring the doorbell at first. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, his body crooked with regret. Opened it. He entered as if asking permission from his own childhood. He spoke. He spoke without hiding in anyone's lap. He asked for forgiveness. I didn't try to get anything heroic out of him. Cowardice doesn't turn into courage in 24 hours. I said he would need time. That love and trust are related, but they don't always live in the same house. He agreed in silence, and in that silence I saw, for the first time, a man learning to stand on his own feet. My daughter-in-law didn't return. I learned from others that she tried to undo her story into less ugly versions. It turns out that versions don't erase audio recordings. And a city has a memory when the truth is spoken out loud. I didn't waste my breath chasing her shadow. There are defeats that don't need an audience to keep hurting. Night I made coffee. The smell filled the kitchen, crossed the tiles, and sat with me at the table. I held the mug with both hands, as if holding my own face. I remembered the shifts, the chairs in the corner, the times when "ma'am" was just a polite way to call me invisible. I remembered the words that pushed me to the margins and the hands that pulled me back without a fuss. I remembered myself. And how so many women like me walk with their heads held high on streets where respect insists on paying a toll. I'm not writing this story to prove that I'm strong. I'm writing so that none of us confuse kindness with a doormat. The world has a habit of asking us for sweetness while it chews our bones. Well then, I learned that sweetness can also be a trench, and that honey, when spilled at the right time, sticks to the face of the person who tried to stain us. Now, when I open the living room window, the trumpet tree extends a yellow that hurts it so beautiful. The house is the same, but I am not. I moved the defeats to another place, and they lost their address. If you walk on the sidewalk and look carefully, you will see that the walls are still old, yes. What's new inside is the silence, not the one that accepts but the one that chooses. The silence that separates kindness from naivety, compassion from complicity. To conclude, I leave the lesson that chose me. Kindness is not weakness. Kindness is the hand that builds the table. Weakness is the laughter that needs to destroy the one who built it to feel tall. And when the truth arrives, it doesn't need to scream. It just turns on the light. And whoever lived in the shadows blinks, stumbles, and falls alone. If this story found you in a dark place, sit here for a moment. In this house, we learn to get up without asking for permission. And if you want to walk with me in the future, there's a chair on the porch, coffee on the stove, and stories that don't ask for forgiveness to exist. If this touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now. Here we turn silence into justice, memory into strength, and wounds into a path. Every voice that arrives helps another not to be silent.